are usually to Vanita Banks. She has a master's in tax. She's a cyber security expert and a crack research analyst. And we're always glad to have her. Her input is valuable. And also, our fellow Milton Grimes, if he get over the weather, we expect him to join us. Now, one thing I need to start off before we get started is that the COVID, the Delta variants, I was looking at these statistics and it showed that we were down to about 10,000 folks a day back in June being exposed to COVID. The vaccination process was going very well. Then it just hit a rock. I mean, we went from as many as 3 million people a day getting vaccination down to less than 400,000. And so what occurred is that because so many people were unvaccinated, they exposed themselves to the more aggressive virus that developed. That would always happen. And so unless we get to the point where we get about 80% of the folks get both of the shots, we're going to continue to have these upsurge. But we have no reason because in our country, it's free and they're available everywhere. And I was looking at some of the countries in the world. Most of the countries in the world don't have access to vaccination. You know, I looked at the amount of vaccination available in places like Jamaica. It's like 4%. So around the world, look at Cuba and different countries. Haiti's got like 2%. So you go from country to country and realize that we really are very blessed in our country that we have a process to get rid of this disease process. But nevertheless, Attorney Banks, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Good morning, Attorney Lee. It's so great to be back and joining the show today.
Yeah, I'm concerned. As with a heavy heart, I see that we have an uptick in this disease process again. It's just very disturbing to me because in our country, we've done everything possible to make this process available to everybody. And what I don't understand is why, when we have a life-saving mechanism, I don't understand why people don't take advantage of it. It just bothers me. And I've talked to numerous people when I'm out and about, and when I talk to them, the people that are unvaccinated, they have some really interesting stories that they say. And what I've been seeing lately, I mean, every day if you look at YouTube, they post somebody died in the hospital and they all say the same thing. I wish I had taken the vaccination, and as they're dying. And I'm thinking, I don't know what could be more relevant or for people to take this more serious. I just can't figure it out.
Well, Attorney Lee, unfortunately, and we're seeing this across the nation, so many people are victims of misinformation regarding the vaccine. I was in a store yesterday, and many retail establishments are still requesting, and some are mandating, that masks be worn inside the store and that the social distancing guidelines be followed. But at this juncture, we're seeing, whether you're fully vaccinated or not, people with or without masks. And so yesterday I was in a retail establishment, and someone got into my space. Although I'm fully vaccinated, I had a mask on, and this young lady was not masked. And so I kind of, sometimes I'll put my hands out to observe the 6 feet distance because she wasn't wearing a mask. And you really don't know if someone not wearing a mask is or is not vaccinated. And she shared with me that, oh no, it's not a problem. The COVID-19 is not airborne. And I was just stunned at some of the, reasons that people will give you regarding COVID-19 that are just preposterous and not based on any kind of science. And it's distressing to me that here in the U.S. that COVID cases, they're up by 500% in the last month, and we're seeing our children getting sick. In fact, Florida leads the country of children that are hospitalized with COVID-19. And so while we're doing so well in our battle to fight COVID-19, this new variant, which is much more highly transmissible and has proliferated across all of our states. We're now experiencing just last week 100,000 new cases, and there's 61,000 people that are hospitalized. And so, Attorney Lee, you're absolutely right. I read a statistic recently that only 5% of people in Africa are vaccinated. And as you know, the U.S. is exporting vaccines to Africa and India and other countries. And here in the United States, we know that it is offered free. One of the things that I wanted to ask our audience today is if they are seeing or experiencing any access issues in their communities and in their neighborhoods.
Well, see, here in Indianapolis, for example, we had like a dozen sites, and not counting, then you could go to the CVS and place like that, the pharmacy, to get shots. And so we had the Marion County Health Department had a site on Commercial, and it was a huge operation. And what I saw was a well-organized mechanism, but very few people were taking advantage of it. So we've had it available for a long time here in the city and in the state of Indiana. And but what troubled me is that down in Florida, you were talking about that, and it's almost like the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, decided to make masks, which is a public safety issue, a political issue. So he's saying that people should have a choice whether or not they wear a mask. Well, the problem with that is that he threatened to withhold funds from school corporations who mandated that people wear masks. Now, the kids may contract the virus and they recover. The teacher contract the virus, they die a lot of times. So I'm thinking, this is idiotic. But he threatened to withhold funds. I don't know whether or not that's constitutional, what he's doing. And I think that there's going to be a barrage of lawsuits on this issue if he follows through on his threat. But because what he's doing is that he's trying to score a political point with a minority of voters to enhance his possibility of re-election. At the same time, he's raising money on the backs of people who could die. It's shameful that a person in that position, their duty, when they take an oath, is to serve and protect the citizen. And I think along the way, we've seen a radical departure of politician protection citizen. We got into this mess because we had a president who decided to ignore the virus, who minimized the virus. And then we saw along the way how, depending on what study you look at, whether it's 620,000 or 1.2 million, good Americans died because this disease process was not taken serious. It was minimized. And make matters worse, we kept getting misinformation. So now we're headed back to a point in American history that is bad. We have a process to help rid us of this dreadful disease process, and we get pushed back. So I think that most Americans should look at the statistics. If we did not have this vaccination, we would probably be seeing a minimum by now, maybe 10,000 folks per day could be dying. And I think people can't overlook that. We hit almost 5,000 deaths at one time before we got the vaccines under control. So having said that, I hope that everybody listening, I hope that they ignore this negative stuff. I know we even have some people that call our show from time to time who give negative information about vaccine. And here's what I thought important, Attorney Banks. From the time that we start school, we have to show vaccination. Even back in the days, you're vaccinated for various disease process, and nobody really questioned that because it was a requirement to attend school. So now we have a process where we have one of the worst disease process in American history, and so the question is, should they make it mandatory again? And a lot of people didn't look at the statute since 1905. The government can make this vaccination process mandatory. And whether people like it or not, I mean, they could in order to save lives of other folks, not the folks that are unvaccinated, but they can expose people who, even though they've had shots, they could not be fully protected from this process. But how's the vaccination process headed in the Chicago area?
Well, we're seeing, increases as well. And I had some statistics that I'm going to try to get my hands on. But we do know that the vaccine is effective in preventing serious disease, highly effective in preventing hospitalization and death, and the probability of severe symptoms. We are seeing some breakthrough infections of those that have been fully vaccinated. And we're also hearing from the White House administration, to your point, Attorney Lee, considering withholding funds from institutions in order to boost and increase the number of vaccinations. We're seeing mayors in states such as Florida and Georgia going against their governor's executive orders, and they are requiring masks because we know that masks are very effective in protecting against the disease. And we know that the vaccine also cuts the reinfection probabilities of those who have contracted COVID-19 in the past, because one of the hesitancies, or one of the reasons that you hear from citizens that have had COVID-19 is that they don't need a vaccine because they have the antibodies that were developed in the aftermath of their getting the virus.
Okay, let's go to the callers. Caller, you have a question or comment for us today?
Yeah, how you doing? Thanks for taking my call, Brother Nate. And it's funny.
Hey, your comments last week did spark a lot of controversies, Tap, about, I mean, when I was out and about, there was a lot of people who heard your comment and responded. I mean, it was interesting.
Yeah, well, like I said, I'm just trying to figure out. I'm a United States Air Force veteran, and before I got deployed, we had to get everything: yellow fever, cholera, malaria, all kinds of. I'm just trying to figure out. My mother just came this morning. She's a retired attorney, for almost 50 years. But she's trying to figure out. She remembers polio and smallpox and all the stuff like that. And people, she was in Missouri, people in line. I'm just trying to figure out. Can someone send me? I've been at work. I work in a hospital. I go all over the hospital. I do pregnancy testing and stuff like that. So I'm trying to figure out if anybody, because I've looked at 50 schools in the last 3 days that do in-depth research, and I can't find one peer-reviewed research scientific article contrary to the benefits of taking the vaccine now at the point we are now. So if someone can find me 3 from schools. Forget CDC. I don't want no government. We're talking schools or Johns Hopkins or Cleveland Clinic, Mayo Clinic, St. Jude, anywhere like that. If you could find us 3 scientific studies, people, that is contrary to the benefits of the vaccine at this point in August, where we are now, in August of 21, please send them to us. Send them to me, Big Hidden Ray at Twitter. Send them to me. I'll be willing to read them because I can't find them. And that's the only thing I can go by, especially being at work with sick people, is the science. All we can go by. And I'm going to hit it again. If you have a heart attack, don't take Corway. If you got diabetes, don't take it. Do you know insulin is artificial now? Insulin's not made from humans. Insulin's not made from pork or from pigs anymore. Insulin is synthetic. Ask people to work at Lilly. Okay? Most of the medications that you are taking that are generic, you don't know where they're coming from. You don't know what's in them. They're supposed to be equal to the brand name, but I've had patients tell me that if they were taken off a brand name blood pressure medication and put on a generic, it didn't work well. Their blood pressure wasn't stabilized. So why are we just picking and choosing? That's all I'm asking. Why are we picking and choosing what we want to enter in the body? I just left the store and I got my bag. It's organic. I just left Fresh Line. I got it all organic. I'm looking at the McDonald's line is wrong. The Church's Chicken line is wrong. The Fried Chicken line is wrong. These Arab joints on the corner from this greasy chicken, it's wrong line. That's what's going to kill you first. So that's all I'm trying to ask. If you truly care about your bodies, people, and you want to be attentive to your body, then do it all the way. That's all I'm saying. As a almost 30-year health professional, because we're loaded. People in the ICU the other day were so loaded, they couldn't even take patients coming in out of surgery that needed ICU care because the ICUs are backloaded. They're full. So you guys don't see this. Maybe you hear about it, Nate. I see it. I see it every day. So I don't want to hear from people who don't see it. I see it daily. We can't take care of you. If you come in, no one's going to take care of your black self. Trust me, they don't want to see you. Okay? You had a doctor die in Carmel, a black doctor who said she didn't get good care. So you can do what you choose to do out here, people. But I'm telling you, if you don't take care of yourself holistically and give yourself the best chance to be healthy in anything out here, then I don't know what you're going to do. Because most of you all don't have good insurance. Most of you all can't sit in the ICU and pay for it or have insurance to pay for it for 30 or 40 or 50 days, be on a vent. Let's just be serious about what's going on out here before you talk about what you all are really putting in your body. I shouldn't see that McDonald's line long anymore. I shouldn't see that Kentucky Fried Chicken line long. I shouldn't see that Church's Chicken nasty line long. I shouldn't see any of that. That's what's going to kill you, quicker than anything. Thanks, Nate.
Well, thank you for your comment. And before we go to the next caller, one quick thing I need to point out to our audience. If you are sick and go to the hospital, most of the hospital, they get federal funds, but they have indigent care program. So don't be afraid to go to the hospital, because if you don't have the funds and you're not working, for example, you can apply for indigent care. Like Eskenazi, for example, is a public supported hospital, and you apply, you submit your documentation, and so you don't pay for medical care in our city if you don't have the resources. A lot of people don't realize that, so they'll get sued for not paying a hospital bill, not realizing that when they're at the hospital, they need to go to the finance department and ask that the bill be written off because you don't have the funds, and they will write off the bill. It's not that complicated to get that done, so don't forget about that. Now let's go to the next caller real quick. William, you have a comment for us today, sir?
How you doing, Mr. Lee?
Doing great.
Yeah, we are putting our children in extreme danger. The children were contacting the virus long before the story came out that the children wasn't too affected by it. Our children were dying even when they were only given the given the shot to the elderly, and our children was dying from the COVID-19. And now they have said that since the children was not affected by this virus, that they wasn't going to administer the shot. And all of the adults the seniors have received shots, not well, the majority of them have. Not our children is in extreme danger because the latest data they have came out states that our children is being affected by this virus at an extremely high rate. Now, how do we rectify the fact that our children listened to the people initially and became infected by this virus? How do they overcome the time lapse between the time that they had to wait to get to a shot and now? How do they rectify this? And now I'll open up the schools, which will cause the children to become in touch with a lot of the people that has became infected with the virus.
Well, Attorney Banks, did you hear what he said?
I did. There's a lot to unpack there. And yes, we're seeing that our children are getting sicker. The vaccine is not available I think it's available at 12 and up. And so that's why we need to, as adults, get vaccinated. We also need to observe the mask mandates and the social distancing. There's a big debate across school systems across the country as to whether or not to reinstate mask mandates as children are returning to school. And there are lawsuits being filed by parents with children that have asthma and other conditions that make their children vulnerable. There's suits that would mandate masks, and then there's suits that would, take the position that one has a right to make a decision with respect to mask. But this is something that, unfortunately, as Attorney Lee stated, has been politicized. But we should always follow the science. And the science says that if we want to get the schools reopened, that we need to ensure that we reach this 80% goal of herd immunity, and that as the schools reopen, that we observe the mask and social distancing guidelines. Because if not, we're going to continue to see serious illness and death among our children. And unfortunately, we're going to see our schools have to go back to remote learning.
Terrible. Well, now for our audience, at this time, we're going to take a short commercial break. For YouTube and Facebook, we'll continue our discussion. And at this time, our live radio audience, all the callers could stay on hold. We'll get to you in about 2.5 minutes. Thank you. Now, for the folks who are on YouTube and Facebook, we will like to continue this discussion. We do get your text and your communication, and we do answer those questions electronically. Now, what we are concerned about is this tremendous uptick in the virus in terms of hospitalization. If you watch hospitals, like particularly in Florida, where they're now out of ICU beds, and I'm concerned about cities such as New Orleans, where they're running out of beds to actually treat the disease process. And at the same time, we have a vaccination process that the government has spent billions of dollars on to make us safe, to give us some protection. And I'm a big believer that if we all just simply follow the signs, as Americans, we can rid ourselves of this dreadful disease process. And I'm hoping that each and every one of you that are paying attention to this adhere to these things that our president is trying to do and our administration, and take advantage of this free treatment. One of the biggest advantages of being in America is that, we are a country that's overcome a lot of different obstacles. We overcame a presidency, 45th president, that tried to eliminate democracy. We are not seeing the effects of it as we see congressional hearings. But we saw the government minimize this threat to disease process. It was a terrible thing, of course. Then there's a ray of hope. There's always daylight after such darkness. So now, back in June, we saw the numbers drop dramatically. Now they're increasing. So the point I'm making is YouTubers, Facebook, go out there if you haven't had your shot, go out and get it today. Now, back to the caller. Caller, you have a comment for us today. Radio? Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm a healthcare worker, and I will advise the public to stay healthy. I say that because there is a shortage of nursing in the hospitals, long-term care. So I agree with a little bit of what the earlier caller said. Keep yourself healthy, because when you get in the hospital, there are not enough nurses to go to take care of these people. The hospitals here in Annapolis had to go on diversion. And diversion means they have to take those patients to another hospital. They've taken them to Fort Wayne and Muncie. So there's a shortage of nurses. There's a shortage of healthcare workers. Take care of yourself. Eat healthy, exercise. Don't get sick. I'm advising you, do not get sick, because you may not be taken care of in the hospital. That's my comment.
Wow. I like to
Her point is well taken
comment.
about the shortage of. Her point is so well taken about the shortage of healthcare workers, and that's becoming increasingly true as our population just ages in general. And this was way before COVID. And I also wanted to state that 98% of hospitalizations with COVID-19 are unvaccinated patients. And that's a powerful statistic, and shows the importance of getting the vaccine. And this is about protecting children that are too young to be vaccinated. That's building on the point of an earlier caller, and they're very vulnerable to the disease. And so it's important to look at the cases in your county and the number of hospitalizations and ICU beds. And we're seeing a tremendous increase in COVID-19 hospitalizations, and the increase in or the lack of availability of ICU beds and rooms because of the increase in hospitalizations due to COVID-19.
That's terrible. Okay, let's go, producer, to the next caller. Caller, you have a question or comment for us today?
Yes, I got a. Hello.
Hello?
Yes, I got a question about this herd immunity. If it takes 12 to 15 years for 12 to 25 years for the herd immunity to take place, how does that affect the young people who cannot take the shot right now?
I apologize. I'm not a medical expert. I don't know whether my counsel can answer that. I don't know, because I have to get a medical expert on to answer those type of questions. I can only comment on the legal aspect. We had a caller that talked about there have been a shortage of healthcare professionals at the hospital. The one thing I could tell you is that it gets much more difficult to sue a hospital for malpractice because of that. We see patients that are neglected, are not seen in 4 hours at the hospital. It's becoming a norm now because there's a shortage of healthcare professionals, and there's no liability on the hospital. So people are dying. So when they're given the death certificate for COVID, there are there's still malpractice that are occurring that is probably the fourth biggest cause of death, but there's no liability because they have a shortage of workers, and so therefore, even when you go to hospital, it's in some situation you can't get medical attention right away because there's so many other people that have urgent medical needs at the same time. So it's just a fact of life. When the nurse calls and says there's a shortage of nurses, folks, there is a shortage of healthcare professionals, particularly in our neighborhoods.
And
I don't know whether you can answer that question, Attorney Banks.
I'm not an expert in herd immunity, and we have had infectious disease experts on the show, and I think that in a future show, we will invite those experts to join us. But I will say that to the extent that the American public that can be vaccinated is vaccinated, and that percentage increases, and I understand from the medical commentary that I've seen, close to 80% or so, that will decrease the probability of transmittability to young people and others that are not vaccinated.
Okay. Okay, now we'll take our next caller.
Oh, good afternoon, or good morning, Nate and the other attorney, Banks. Here's the thing. Two things from both of you guys. I would, Nate, from you, I'm going to need a recommendation from an employment law firm. And here's the second part of that. These people won't do what the government says because they don't have to, but they will do what their employer says. And I work with a lot of people, and a lot of people, I ain't getting the shot. But the minute our employer told us to put on those masks again, whether you vaccinated or not, I didn't see nobody walking out the door because they had to put the mask on. And it's probably going to come down to them telling people, you got to get vaccinated or you can't work here. And I doubt too many people will forego the shot then. They talk real tough now, but when the boss says you got to get the shot, most people are probably going to get the shot because they don't want to lose their job, and it's a situation where they can't fight it because the employer can mandate that you be vaccinated. And I just wanted to hear what you had to say on that.
Well, before Attorney Banks, it's pretty simple. Since 1905, there's case law that suggested that the government can require mandates in terms of vaccination. But more importantly, Indiana is an employment at will state. And so in our state, I can't speak to every state, but in our state, for example, the employer could put those conditions of employment on, and they could be enforceable. And you wouldn't have any legal remedy to sue because the safety of others is paramount. It's okay if a person themselves want to commit suicide, but they should not want to kill everybody else. And so I'm not saying suicide is a good idea. The point I think it's bad, but the point is that you should not expose other people to disease or death just because you have what you think is a constitutional right. And finally, our university just tackled this problem. There were some students that said that we don't want to be vaccinated subject to these protocol, and the court said, no, the university has the right to do so. And so they're trying to take the case to the U.S. Supreme Court. It'd be interesting. I don't see that case having any legs in terms of going to the U.S. Supreme Court, but who knows? What are your thoughts, Attorney Banks?
Attorney Lee, are you referencing the lawsuit filed against Indiana University
Yes.
over student vaccinations? Absolutely. It would be interesting to see how that case proceeds. And the caller is absolutely right. We're beginning, the carrot is not working. So we're beginning to see employers apply the stick and mandating vaccinations for continued employment. We just saw United Airlines, I believe, this week mandate their employees to take the vaccine. Also, we're seeing employers require proof of vaccination and actually require employees to upload their vaccination proof. And if they're not vaccinated, be subject to periodic, and I've seen weekly COVID tests. And so, yes, I think we're going to begin to move into an era of mandated employer vaccine requirements. And this is a national security issue, and the public health and safety interest supersedes the privacy right in this case, although we're going to see a plethora of employment litigation around this issue.
Okay, now at this time we'll take a short commercial break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the other major issue, that is voter suppression, that is ripping through our country and trying to eliminate the rights of citizens, particularly minority community, to exercise their constitutional right to vote. So at this time, we'll take a short commercial break and callers to hold on until we get back. Now, for the folks that are on YouTube and Facebook, one thing that we need to cover, I think Attorney Banks, is very important. There is a lot of litigation on this pandemic. But one of the things that I need to alert everybody to is that this has wreaked havoc with our court system. This issue is so bad. What I mean is that we have not been able to do a jury trial in my law firm since 2019, October 2019. And I've had as many as 24 jury trials in 1 year. And so we're going into 2 years without jury trials, almost 2 years. And when we had a jury trial scheduled in May in federal court, the requirement to do a jury trial was so different. You could only have 2 people in the courtroom at each side. We were 82 feet away from the judge. It was just a very strange process. And we've had some trials, but under this COVID protocol, the trials are very difficult. They're very different. Now, on the other hand, we've seen an increase in verdicts nationally when there's trials, but the point is that it's wreaking havoc with our judicial system. And right now, Marion County, which is like 40% of civil jury trials, they weren't only allowing 1 trial a week because of COVID. And then we had several trials in mistrial. As soon as somebody called in and say, hey, I got a fever, I think I got COVID, mistrial. And so you spend all the time, money, and effort to prepare a case for trial. It just takes one person to say that they had COVID. Now everybody's been exposed to it, so it results in a mistrial. So the point is that, folks, this COVID process, and we're back live now, is so bad until it's worse than people realize. Now, Attorney Banks, switching gears, voter suppression. Where are we at now? Could you give us a quick update on that?
Well, in the aftermath of the 2020 national election, we've seen over 400 voter suppression bills being introduced in virtually every state across the nation. And we've seen, for example, Georgia Senate Bill 202, which would weaken early voting, allow unlimited challenges by any individual to another citizen's, ballot. It would criminalize, and yes, I said criminalize, the provision of food and water to voters, many of which are Black and brown voters, that stood up to 9 hours to vote. And so I don't understand why we aren't introducing laws across this nation which would prohibit a process which would result in any voter having to wait in line for 8 to 9 hours. And these are the kind of voter suppression laws that we're seeing being introduced across this nation. A law such as a bill that would, for example, enable state officials to remove local elected election officials and insert themselves into the process. And again, all based on the big lie that there was voter fraud, and it's being used as a tool to introduce and pass these voter suppression, these abhorrent voter suppression laws in states such as Georgia. There's the Senate Bill 202, and Texas is teed up to do the very same thing.
Well, that's terrible. We're seeing is that we have a minority party who want to control the government. And so we see, although there were 7.1 Democratic voters across the country, which meant that we should have probably gotten at least 60% of the congressional seat and should have won the Senate seat, we did not. What happened, particularly in the congressional seat, because of gerrymandering, where they've done target specific, and eliminate the ability to properly elect minorities and Democrats in a lot of districts. For example, here in Indianapolis, my political district swung between Carson and the north side, Hamilton County, and it was just going back and forth every 10 years. I'm not sure who I'll be voting for in the next congressional race, because when they redraw the map, they may decide to, in order to protect the district up in Carmel, they may decide to take away more of the Indianapolis vote to make sure that is protected. See, all they could do when they do this voting ordeal, the way they draw the lines, is that if you have a political stronghold, say for Democrats, particularly African American, you could draw the map, instead of having it pro rata where you have 52% Democrats in a district, you could put 90% Democrats in one district, which means that you may eliminate the ability to elect 2 other state representatives in 2 other districts by lumping them all and have non-competitive election. So when you get to the state house, you're a small minority party. And that's the way this gerrymandering has transgressed all across the country. And so the net result is they're trying to do the same thing again. And Attorney Banks will point that out. But Attorney Banks, it seems like that this process is being repeated all over the country. What do you think can be done to eliminate this terrible ordeal?
Well, we need a national federal standard, and we need the passage of the For the People Act, H.R. 1, which would establish national standards for elections. And it's clear that Congress can make laws regarding elections. H.R. 1 would enable early voting, mail-in ballots, enable drop boxes, automatic registration, and we're seeing these voter suppression laws that would restrict mail-in ballots, would require voter identification, restrict early voting. And so in order to preserve each citizen's fundamental right to vote, which is fundamental to our democracy, in fact, a hallmark of our democracy, we need to have the For the People Act enacted as law.
Well, one of the challenges that we're faced with is that when you talk to people in Washington, I've talked to a few people, is that our majority in the House and Senate is very narrow. We can get legislation passed in the House, but in the Senate, we have two Democrats who are against elimination of the filibuster. The filibuster in the old days required a Senate person, a member of the Senate, who was opposed to legislation, actually had to speak in the floor of the Senate nonstop. And they had to do it for 16 hours or 24 hours, what have you. And they would let them take short bathroom breaks. But by and large, they had to just physically be present. The new Senate filibuster rule doesn't require that. And so we have a filibuster rule that allows someone to make an objection to legislation, a senator, and I just think that they need to eliminate it altogether because right now, as the president said, it's Jim Crow redone, Jim Crow 2021. And so we need to work hard as America to make sure that these draconian rules never affect the outcome of the 2022 election. And right now, we're heading in that direction. I don't know whether or not the Justice Department is doing enough to protect us. You know, I see a few lawsuits filed, but I'm thinking that this is happening all over the country because of this lie. We saw now, Attorney Banks, I was watching the process about the what happened on January 6th unfold, and now more details are coming out about this so-called big lie that is becoming more, I don't know, it's almost scary. It's almost as if our federal government almost got overthrown and we had people complicit in that. And I don't understand why the government is not more aggressive and making those people who attempted this coup more responsible. You know, I don't get it.
There was a attempted coup detat. It was a failed attempt, but it was almost successful. And yesterday marked the 56th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act. And we are today, as we're speaking, witnessing a frontal attack on our fundamental right to vote, which is the bedrock of our democracy, through these voter suppression laws that have been introduced in virtually every state. States, of course, and including Florida and Georgia and Arizona, these audit laws, although there's no, and we've witnessed these audits that have revealed no evidence of fraud in the 2020 election, but they keep pushing this false narrative and misinformation.
It's terrible. And we're watching this being unfolded real time. And the danger that we're looking at, you know, historically speaking, we look at countries such as South Africa, where you had a small majority of people that control the country, you know, for a long time. And America supported the minority of whites that was in power. And you see that type of thought process invading the American experience. That is that you're trying to get a minority of the folks that control our government. These laws and things that they are trying to make doesn't make a lot of sense. And one of the big dangers that we saw the federal deficit under the prior administration go from about 20 trillion up to $27 trillion. So in 4 years, the Republican-led House, Senate, and the presidency, they created a deficit in America that was 1/4 of the federal deficit since the inception of the United States of America. Folks, the Trump administration created a federal deficit that was 1/4 of the entire federal deficit since the inception of the United States of America. They did that through this tax legislation that allows people that were millionaires and billionaires pay little or no taxes. And most people didn't pay attention to it, but our president himself, former President Trump, paid less taxes than probably anybody on the radio show. Less in federal income taxes than the folks that are listening to this and a so-called billionaire. So this meant that in order to have a federal system that protects everybody, when you make a distinction between rich and the haves and have not that severe, then the net result is that poor folks get poor, rich people get richer. And that's just the net effect of tax legislation. So, you can keep that in mind.
And we've seen that this trickle-down theory just does not work. And I guess the question becomes, where do we go from here? And we need to move from talk to action. And I think we're seeing that being demonstrated this summer to make this summer a summer of action. We're seeing members of Congress, including members of the Congressional Black Caucus, protest on behalf of our citizens and our fundamental right to vote. We're seeing leaders like the Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. lead protests and again be arrested to ensure that we continue this democracy, because democracy is at stake. We're seeing Cori Bush, who in the wake of millions of Americans losing housing and becoming home insecure, she took a chair to the Capitol, and she didn't leave until there was a continuation of the moratorium against evicting renters in their homes. We need everybody that is listening to this call to know who your local officials are and understand what their positions are on these issues that we're discussing today, whether it be mask mandates and vaccinations or voter suppression. Know who your school superintendents are. Know who your police superintendents are. Because as we know, all politics are local. Run for office. If you have an issue regarding education, step up to lead that issue. Talk to your friends and neighbors using the science regarding vaccinations. This summer can be a summer of tremendous progress, but we all have to lead where we're planted in our local communities. Know who your U.S. representatives are and your senators in your states. Obtain their numbers, call them, write them, prepare op-eds to submit to your neighborhood newspapers. We need an all-out citizen approach and leadership to save our democracy.
Well, thank you for that important comment, because I don't think most people realize how close we were to the eliminating of democracy as we know it. We now see documentation of a former president who did everything to corrupt the system. He was a lawless president, and he was responsible for the death of hundreds of thousands of folks because of his response to the pandemic. So we thank you very much for your comment, Attorney Banks. Now, in conclusion today, we had a question about herd immunity, and so next week we'll bring an expert on to cover that subject. And we're going to have news of the day. We're going to cover legal issues of the day, as always. And but don't forget, folks, as we start sending our kids back to school and we go our different ways, make sure that you do everything to protect yourself. And we had people from the hospital call in today. They say, don't come to the hospital. We don't have any beds for you because we have too many sick people. When this COVID start running rampant again, folks, it's just one of those ordeals whereby you're going to see a lot of our friends and neighbors die. So make sure you do everything within your power to make sure that you're properly protected, and try to get your friends, your neighbors, and people that are around you. So we like to make sure that the life that you save may be your own. So thank you for listening in, for all our viewers on YouTube, Facebook, and of course, our 3 station here in Indianapolis, and also on the internet. Next week, we will tackle those legal issues that you want to talk about. In the meantime, you have legal issues you think are relevant, contact the radio station and make a note and contact us through our website. Thank you and have a blessed day. And don't forget, go out there and do some good for your friends and your neighbors.